After going on an incredible run and winning the World Series in 2019, the Washington Nationals have been going through a large-scale rebuild. They haven't won more than 71 games in a season since that 2019 series, and 2024 was the first year in that span that they didn't finish 5th in the National League East. With that being said, there's officially light at the end of this tunnel for this rebuild. They've capitalized on prospect packages from trading some of the big players from that team. They've made some really solid draft selections over the past couple years and have done a good job at building up that farm system. And Washington is officially entering the early stages of their contending window. Let's get right into a look at some of the team ranks from last season for Washington. I want you to know all of these are completely objective. My formula for these are going to be in the description of this video. And a 24th ranked Major League roster combined with an 18th ranked farm system has them slotted in at the 24 overall organization. They had a big boost from their lineup last season. There's some really fun names in there. A very young MLB rotation to go along with that. A couple really highly touted prospects in there and one veteran that really turned around his career. More of an unproven bullpen, to say the least. There are some Major League names in there that are decent. They were 22nd in bullpen rankings last season. Their defense does need to take a step up, 27th in the majors last year. The 2024 Nats traded a lot of defense for lineup production. Although they do have one of the best center fielders in the game by a lot of defensive metrics, their farm system, I mentioned 18th. The hitters are definitely the strength of that system. There's some really fun guys coming up, a couple high draft picks through that system. The minor league pitchers aren't as good, not as much depth as some other organizations. I'll go right into the manager and president of baseball operations here for the Nationals. Dave Martinez, 8th season with the Nats here, 463 and 569, a winning percentage, a tick under 500. Mike Rizzo in his 17th season here with Washington. Over 1,200 wins as the president of baseball operations. He's made the playoffs 5 times in his span. One thing I'll say about Mike Rizzo, when he gets to the top of the draft, he seemingly really knows how to do the process. Former top picks for the Nationals include Bryce Harper, Steven Strasburg, Dylan Cruz we'll see here, and as you can see on the screen, they won the draft lottery and do have the number 1 pick this season. Last season, the Nationals took their first big step forward, 71 and 91, 4th in the National League East and 13th in the National League. Their payroll was a tick over $100 million. 24th ranked in the majors. They had a big contract taken off their books this offseason, and Patrick Corbin, who was making $25 million, really kind of struggled through the back end of that deal. The PECOTA projections for 2025 has them at 67 and 95, so a little bit of a step back for the Nats. 4th in the National League East, 13th in the National League. Again, their payroll did go up just a little bit. They made a couple of last-minute signings here before I'm putting this video out to push them over. PECOTA has their 2025 playoff odds at just 0.5%. They do play in a pretty tough position. It's really tough to project this team because of a lot of the youth that they have on their roster. I would say it's a bit higher than that in my opinion. I think they can go on a run and take really a step forward to get into that window. The PECOTA projections, it doesn't seem really like their pitching staff much at all. I think I have a little bit of a different view on it. There's a lot of youth there, of course. I think there's some pretty solid pitchers. I think they can be better than they're projected to be. Going into the top 100 draft capital, I mentioned the number 1 pick. They won the draft lottery. That's a huge step for this franchise, something to be really excited about. They also have 49 and 80 in this draft, so 3 top 100 picks, including 2 top 50 and the number 1 pick. So coming draft time, I think the Nats should be really excited for that. Their top contracts here, 2 of them just brought in this offseason. Nate Lowe in a trade with Texas. Michael Soroka, also known as Mike Soroka, I guess, former pitcher of the Braves in a division rival. He went to the White Sox in a trade last season, came out of the bullpen a bit, started a bit, was really solid out of the pen. I would like to see him probably there. And then Trevor Williams, a vet making $7 million, the guy that I mentioned in the intro that really turned his career around last year. They haven't been back to the playoffs since they won that World Series in 2019. Park factor I have listed on the screen. It's a stat that measures how much of a hitter or pitcher's park you are. League average is 100. They're just over it at 101. They're the 9th biggest hitter's park in all of baseball. And then the organization success on the bottom. Their AAA roster and their A roster were really solid last year. 77 and 71, 74 and 57. The AA roster finished at just around 500. The high A team wasn't very good, 57 and 75. For me, the biggest season storylines for this team, the high upside outfield. This is really one of the more fun outfields in the entire game. 3 young guys, 2 super highly touted prospects in James Wood, pictured here, and Dylan Cruz, the former number 2 pick in the draft. And then Jacob Young, a young center fielder who's an incredible defender and took a bit of a step offensively last year. Those 3 guys should bring you a lot of value in the outfield. The pitching questions is the number 2 storyline for me. They do have some really solid starters. MacKenzie Gore, I believe, is a really good one for this team. But with a lot of youth in this rotation just comes a lot of questions because of the lack of experience. There are some good pitchers here. I think we could see some steps forward. Just what happens with this group? The bullpen, albeit a bit more veteran-laden, also has some questions in it. There's not necessarily a lockdown guy in that bullpen. But the Nationals do have a plan, banking on some high upside youth. And then the third base competition is kind of a big question. Jose Tena, Paul DeJong, potentially Amed Rosario, Brady House are some names to watch. Let's see what shapes out at third base, because I think that's the biggest question mark on this roster. A high volume offseason for the Nats this year. A lot of names coming in, not a lot of names going out. Nathaniel Lowe came over in a trade with Texas for Robert Garcia. He'll be your first baseman for a few years, projected just over 2 WAR next season. Shinosuke Ogasawara, reliever, coming over from Japan on a 2-year, $3.5 million deal. And then a lot of prove-it guys. A bunch of guys on 1-year deals here. Josh Bell, welcome back to DC. Michael Soroka, I mentioned earlier, $9 million this year to come pitch for him. Paul DeJong, $1 million. And Amed Rosario kind of competing for that third base spot. Rosario most likely to be a utility guy. Jorge Lopez coming in to shore up the back end of that bullpen. And a short list of subtractions for the Nats in this offseason. Patrick Corbin has been here for a while, was great in 2019, really struggled the last few years of his big contract. He did give you a lot of innings last year, just under 2 WAR in 2024. Jacob Barnes, still a free agent, no WAR in 2024. And Aledmo Vargas, no WAR in 2024. I will mention I didn't put anybody with negative WAR on this list. I'll explain a couple of these numbers in the lineup really quick. WOBA stands for weighted on base average. It's another form of on base percentage, but this time everything is weighted. So a home run is weighted more than a triple, which is weighted more than a double. League average is 310 for that. Rule of thumb, if it would be a good on base percentage, it would be a good WOBA. Weighted runs created plus, just a general offensive stat to measure offensive production. Every plus stat, the average is going to be 100. Everything above or below that is the percent better or worse that you are compared to league average. A very young group here, really only 2 vets in Nathaniel Lowe and Josh Bell at first base and DH. The rest of the guys here are very young or have very low service time in the major leagues. We'll start off with CJ Abrams, above average at shortstop, projected 19 homers, just under 3 WAR. The Cruz Wood outfield. Cruz is a good defender, not as much of a hitter yet in the majors. James Wood projected to be 23% better than league average this year, 21 homers, 3.1 WAR, a great player. Lowe and Bell as your 2 first base options. Both of these guys projected to be above average, although Josh Bell did take kind of a step back last year. Luis Garcia has been up with the Nationals for such a long time and still very young. A lot of major league experience, had a really good season last year, projected just under 3 WAR. Ruiz, your catcher here, brought over from the Dodgers just a couple years ago in a trade, a switch hitter, projected to be a bit below league average. Jose Tena currently slotted in as your starting third baseman. And then Jacob Young at the bottom, a great defender who isn't as much of a hitter. In parentheses on the bench is the projected WAR for 2025. DeJong, Call, and Rosario all over half a projected WAR this season. They should get a decent amount of playing time. I'll say with this lineup, very young. There's a decent amount of pop here and a decent amount of projected WAR, which I do really like. Only 5 of these guys are projected to be above league average, but a couple kind of unknowns in Dylan Cruz and Jose Tena. A lot of lefties here. You really like to see a couple switch hitters. This is just the projected lineup against righties. So on the bench, you got a lot of righties, guys that can't hit lefties. This is a really solid mix of righty and lefty hitters. They should have no issue in switching it up and being decent against both sides at the plate. Really, overall, a fun young lineup with a couple vets to help shore it up. So in the projected rotation, I think they have 6 guys that are going to give you a decent amount of innings in the majors this year, so I just went with 6 here. Soroka currently listed as a starter. I could see him being a bullpen option, but for now, these are the 6 I'm going to go over. The projections don't necessarily like this crew. MacKenzie Gore is projected some really good stats, just under 3 WAR. Irvin had a good season last year, projected to kind of take a step back, a 4.44 ERA. Mitchell Parker, another pretty solid pitcher, a lefty, projected 4.29 ERA, 1.5 WAR for next season. Williams and Soroka are your 2 vets here. Williams had a good year last year. Soroka was pretty solid in the bullpen for the White Sox last season, but didn't really give a ton as a starter. DJ Herz, the 6 here, a lefty, my personal favorite out of this group, projected just under a 4.2 ERA, 25.1% strikeout rate. Will walk a decent amount of guys, though, at 11.6%. And then on the injured list at the bottom, unfortunately, Josiah Gray really would slot in to be the 1 or 2 in this rotation. A good pitcher who's going to miss all of 2025. I'll say about this rotation, again, really young. I'll go over a lot of specifics later when we get into individual breakdowns, but 3 lefties, 3 righties, a decent mix. I think a high variance group because we don't necessarily know what we're going to get out of a lot of these guys outside of maybe MacKenzie Gore. An interesting rotation for the Nationals in 2025. A couple buzzer beater pickups in this projected bullpen for the Washington Nationals. Kyle Finnegan is coming back to Washington. He'll be the closer this season. A good year last year. Lucas Sims brought over from Cincinnati. A high strikeout, high walk guy, about 24% on the strikeout rate and just over 12% on the walk rate. He'll slot into the middle of this pen. And that really does kind of shore up some question marks. Jorge Lopez was the projected closer. He'll now slot into a high leverage role alongside Jose A. Ferrer. Both Ferrer and Derek Law projected under a 4 ERA this season. Both pretty solid pitchers. Law and Poche will fill up the middle of this bullpen alongside a Rule 5 guy in Evan Reifert. Remember, a Rule 5 guy means that if you get picked by this team, you have to stay on the Major League roster all season. Otherwise, you're returned to your original team. He came over from Tampa Bay in the Rule 5 draft. You feel pretty good when you're able to take any pitching out of Tampa Bay. And then Shinosuke Ogasawara, a lefty coming over from Japan, projected a 4.91 ERA and a 20.1% strikeout rate. Those 2 guys at the bottom are going to be your rookies this year. Ogasawara more than likely will give you some innings, more of a multi-inning guy at times, in my opinion, but an interesting bullpen, a good mix of youth and vets. The projections really don't like a lot of these guys. A few of them they do, though. Law, Ferrer, Finnegan, all projected pretty decent stats this year. Some good strikeout numbers across the board, but can be a question mark for the Nats this season. Into these individual breakdowns, I'll go over some numbers really quick. All of the numbers, the OFF, BSR, DEF, that's your offensive base running and defensive run value on Fangraphs. Those will be listed in percentiles compared to the rest of the league. And then your baseball savant page here, it'll be a lot of expected numbers, things like expected WOBA, batting average, and slugging, how hard you hit the ball, if you strike out a lot or not, your walk rates, some defensive stats, and then running. And then on the cards, age, wins above replacement since 22, your slash line, weighted runs created plus, and WOBA, homer, steals, and games played. Remember, weighted runs created plus average is 100, WOBA average is 310. So starting off with this catcher group in Washington, a huge step back last year for Ruiz as your starting catcher. Switch hitter, didn't get really any numbers last season offensively, and honestly one of the worst defenders in baseball at the position. 13th percentile in defense, 4th in offense last year. He was supposed to be one of the biggest parts of this rebuild, still only 26 years old, coming over from the Dodgers in the Max Scherzer trade. A catcher with a lot of prospect pedigree that hasn't really got it going yet in the majors. The biggest things for him offensively, he won't strike out a lot, he doesn't whiff a lot. His issue is that he does chase, doesn't really hit the ball very hard, doesn't hit the ball in the air very often. In 2023, he hit 260 at 18 home runs and a 717 OPS, so a pretty decent step back from that year. He was hitting the ball a bit harder in 2023, 25th percentile barrel rate. The launch angle sweet spot, the percent of time that you hit the ball between 8 and 24 degrees, was in the 93rd percentile for him. This year, way down to under 30th percentile. Historically, Ruiz is a bit better as a left-handed hitter. He's always hit righties a bit better. Not a free agent until 2031. They actually extended him before he really got a big sample in the majors, so he's going to be around for a while. It's really tough to say if Ruiz can take a step forward just because he doesn't walk very often. He doesn't hit the ball super hard. Not a great profile offensively for Ruiz. Is very young, though, and could end up making a move in that direction. I'll go over Riley Adams really quick, the backup catcher. He's not going to give you a ton offensively either. 75 weighted runs created plus. A bit of a better defender, although not great. He was about 70th percentile in defense. He can spell Ruiz for a day, definitely a catcher, and Ruiz could maybe go to DH for a day as well. Adams does hit righties above league average, so he could help there. Overall, just not a great catching group here in Washington. Nathaniel Lowe at first base, a lefty, really solid first baseman. 3 wins above replacement per 162 in the last 3 years. He was 21% better than league average as a hitter last season, 16 homers in 140 games. A guy who really gets on base for a first baseman as well. 361 on base percentage. He was in the 84th percentile run value offensively and a really good defender at first too, 80th percentile. He's taken a huge step up in that category, 5th percentile in 2022 compared to this last season, a real positive for him. He has some real upside here at first as well. In that 22 season, he had 27 homers and 850 OPS, hit over 300. But really a complete and overall philosophy shift for Nathaniel Lowe. Last season walked 12.6%, that 22 year only 7.4%. He's not striking out as much, he's walking more, not hitting the ball as hard though to go along with that. Was around the 70th to 80th percentile in all of those hard hit statistics from Baseball Savant that year. Took a bit of a step back to what you see on the screen here this year. Overall, still a really solid first baseman, a guy that hits both sides pretty well. A really welcomed addition they sought him out as a target this offseason and really upgraded a position of need, trading a good reliever for him. I'm really excited for what Nathaniel Lowe can do for this lineup. A good pickup for the Nationals. Luis Garcia Jr. at second base, only 24 years old, and he's been in the league for a long time. 11% better than league average. 18 home runs last season, a big step for him. 22 steals, 328 WOBA. Gives you great range at second base, a really solid defender, really solid offensive player, and a good base runner. He's going to bring a lot of value for this team. Much more of a bat-to-ball guy, doesn't strike out much, doesn't really walk at all to go along with that, though. Started hitting the ball a bit harder last year, and the results really came from that. Almost a 2020 season for him at age 24. Definitely a guy who hits righties a bit better than lefties, although the lefty stats aren't terrible for a guy that's being thrown out there every single day. Luis Garcia, a guy who's been in the majors since 2020, only 24 years old, a free agent in 2028. A great second baseman, a guy that really fits this rebuild for Washington. He'll be a fun one to watch moving forward to see if he can keep improving offensively. Third base, I'm going to go through Jose Tena's stats. He's 23 years old, a bit negative as a player last season, but seemingly an all-right hitter. A guy who hits the ball hard, doesn't whiff a lot, but does strike out a decent amount and doesn't really walk to go along with that profile. He does have a good arm over at third base and a decent sprint speed to go along with it. The WOBA to expected WOBA was a bit different. I think we see that go up a bit this year, and only 44 games for Tena in the majors. Pretty drastic righty to lefty splits for Tena, a much better hitter against right-handed pitching. So we'll most likely see a platoon with Tena and Paul DeJong to start the season. Although in the minors last season, 131 plate appearances against lefties, he had an 848 OPS, hit over 300, was actually better against that side. He came over from Cleveland in a trade last season. In the minors, an 824 OPS, 18 home runs over 100 games at the AAA level last year. Pretty solid numbers for him. I think you can be pretty excited about the player that Tena can be, just hasn't really shown much of it yet in the majors. So we get into CJ Abrams here, the first big piece of the Juan Soto trade from San Diego a couple years ago. We'll be talking about a few of the guys that came over in that trade. So he was about middling in almost every single stat offensively last year by Baseball Savant. Bit over league average, 107 weighted runs created plus, 20 steals, 31 bags in 138 games. The hitting is not the issue for CJ Abrams. He's just not a good defender over at shortstop. Negative 17 outs above average. Worst shortstop by that metric in baseball. First percentile in defense run value. He's a great base runner, 92nd percentile. You see that sprint speed is way up for him. He can be an above average player, even though the defense was really bad. 1.7 WAR per 162 since he's been called up. Still only 24 years old. Last season for Abrams offensively, it was really a tale of two seasons. 832 OPS in the first half to a 586 in the second half. A pretty dreadful second half of July and an entire August to September where he did take a step forward. 766 OPS in that month, but didn't play the entire time. Some kind of weird off the field stuff going on with him. I think one thing you feel really good about for him offensively is he really learned how to hit lefties last year, actually hitting them much better than righties. An 811 OPS in 2024 against lefties compared to a 512 OPS in 2023. A huge step forward in that area. He did take a step back against righties, which I don't see as really a long-term issue for him. A 786 in 2023 compared to 717 last year. I think Abrams does a lot of things well when he's locked in. He seems to hit the ball pretty hard. He played 138 games last year, didn't really deal with any major injuries, so he'll be out there for you. I don't think he's the long-term option at shortstop. Specifically, I think he should be more of a third baseman as he moves forward. That might be an avenue for the Nationals to maybe pick up a shortstop in a trade or in free agency, or even draft one with the number 1 pick this year and then move Abrams over to third base to fill up those 2 issues. A good, solid young player with a lot of potential. I think he can still take another step forward offensively if he repeats what he did in the first half. Not a great defender, a very good runner. A lot of good here from CJ Abrams, but a couple things that he definitely needs to work on. We'll go into left field with James Wood, 22 years old. He was maybe my favorite prospect of all time. I can't even state to you the amount of times I refreshed his Fangraphs pages when he was in the minor leagues, because it would probably take about an hour to even talk about that. 120 weighted runs created plus from him last year, so 20% above league average, just coming up for the first time. 342 WOBA, 9 home runs, 14 steals in just 79 games. Even underperformed a decent amount of his numbers. The xWOBA, expected batting average, and expected slugging are all higher. The average exit velocity you could see almost in the 100th percentile. Hard hit rate almost 100th percentile. He doesn't chase very often. He does have some swing and miss. He will strike out. That's going to come with a profile like this. He walks a lot, and that's a huge positive for him. He's going to get on base a lot. I think we see a giant step forward from James Wood this year. The thing with him where he can take a step forward, you see the launch angle sweet spot percent is pretty low. If he starts hitting the ball at that launch angle sweet spot, he might end up being one of the best players in the league offensively. He was really the key piece in the Juan Soto trade, the biggest prospect coming over. It's pretty insane to me how one trade can really reset an entire franchise's rebuild like that, but we're going to talk about almost every single player in that package. Before I get done with his James Wood Glaze Fest, I'll talk about some of his minor league numbers from last year. 52 games, 10 home runs, 1.058 OPS, 42 strikeouts to 40 walks. I mean, just an insane prospect. He came up and he showed it in the majors. I don't know if this is crazy to say, but he might be one of the premier hitters in the league this year. He's just so fun, so good. Barring an injury or a complete change in profile, I don't see how this isn't one of the best young players in the entire league. Jacob Young at center field, 3.0 WAR per 162. Doesn't bring you a ton offensively, but man, look at those defense and base running stats. 99th percentile defense, 94th in base running. He's all the way up there in sprint speed. He had the best outs above average in the entire league last year. 33 stolen bases from Jacob Young in 150 games. Really one of the more underrated players in the entire league just because of the value that he brings on those 2 sides of the ball. If Young can take any semblance of a step forward offensively this year, he becomes instantly one of the biggest values in the league. If he can be a league average bat, we might see a 4 to 5 WAR number from him if he's getting 150 games. Offensively, it's really just a slow bat, a bat that doesn't catch the barrel very often. He really hits the ball, in the bottom 10th percentile in the entire league in terms of exit velocity. He won't whiff a lot. He won't chase as much. He doesn't strike out. He doesn't walk. I would like to see that number go up a bit. If nothing, get on base a little more, be a leadoff hitter or, a bottom of the lineup guy that can just get on base and set it up for the top of the lineup. Still only 25 years old, 3.0 WAR per 162 since he's been called up. He's had 2 seasons in the majors. Hopefully that helps him kind of figure it out a bit more offensively, because if he can do that, he instantly becomes an incredible value. Dylan Cruz in right field, the former number 2 pick in the entire draft, 2.6 WAR per 162. He was just up last season, 23 years old, a bit below average, but the expected numbers did like his season a lot more than the actual numbers he gave. I think right now Dylan Cruz is really underrated as a player. If he got the numbers that are on his Baseball Savant page last year, people would be going crazy about him as a prospect. He hit the ball pretty hard in his time up, didn't strike out a lot. His walk rate was all right, just about league average. He's a really good defender, really fast. The Nationals definitely had a type in getting Young and Cruz. Didn't necessarily light the world on fire statistically in the minors last season. A 793 OPS in 100 games. Did have 13 home runs and 21 doubles. 6 triples to go along with that, but they definitely believe in this guy. His LSU stats are just insane. He was the best player in college baseball unquestionably when he was there. Number 2 pick in the draft, just behind Paul Skeens, and an LSU guy to go along with that. Currently the number 1 prospect in the national system, number 7 in the top 100. He's going to be a rookie this year, definitely a guy that I could see in contention for Rookie of the Year. the final piece of this really, really fun young lineup that could have a great 2025. So Josh Bell comes back to Washington on a one-year deal this year, switch hitting, first base DH type. I assume he could still go out there and play a bit of first, although it's not going to be great defensively. Just under 1 WAR per 162, a bit above league average, 101 weighted runs created plus last season, 19 home runs in 145 games. He is getting a bit older, but he still hits the ball pretty well, 64th percentile in offensive run value. More of a high floor option offensively at this point in his career. He's been about league average the last 3 seasons. He'll give you some pop, but really not much else. He'll get on base for you and slug a bit above league average. I think he could be a solid piece for him. I like the vet pickup for the Nationals. If anything, and they don't get off to a great start, he could definitely be a trade piece. But welcome back to Washington. Josh Bell should have an all right 2025. Guys on the bench here for the Nats, Paul DeJong might end up factoring into this third base competition. 24 homers, bit below league average offensively last year. Amed Rosario can really play anywhere for you. He's been a valuable player. 96 weighted runs created plus, not giving you a ton offensively. Alex Call had a really good sample last year. 167 weighted runs created plus, 412 WOBA, only 30 games though. He'll get some outfield run for this Nats team. Onto the pitching side of the ball, I'll have the Savant numbers here for you, the pitch percentiles and the miles per hour on the pitches, all of the run values, pitching run value, fastball, breaking, and off speed, ERA and FIP, and then Stuff Plus is just a model for how good your stuff is as a pitcher. 100, again, is going to be average. Anything above or below that is a percent better or worse that you are compared to league average. MacKenzie Gore has good stuff. He's above league average in that area. He's really the ace of your staff here, part of that Juan Soto trade I'll mention again. Had a 3.90 ERA. The FIP liked him a lot more. We usually see FIP as a projection of the ERA, so we would expect that number to be a bit closer. A really interesting career path for him as he started off as a giant prospect with the Padres, ended up kind of taking a step back, didn't have a great start in the majors, but really took a step forward last year. His fastball velo is the best that it's ever been. His strikeout stuff is pretty solid. His fastball was really good in 2022. It took a pretty big step back the last 2 years. If he can really make that fastball a good pitch again, I think that will help him a lot. The changeup definitely took a step forward as well for him. 54th percentile in breaking run value. A good lefty pitcher. He'll be here until after the 2027 season at the minimum. A good strikeout guy. He will walk some dudes, but he's a pretty solid pitcher. A good number 1 option for this rotation. Jake Irvin here is your 2. 28 years old. 156 strikeouts last year and 187 innings pitched. 4.41 ERA. Average stuff. Really good off speed and breaking pitches last year. The fastball really got knocked around, and that really hurt his ERA. Pretty interesting. The 4-seamer was actually a much better pitch for him than the sinker. The sinker doesn't have a great shape to it, and it really got hit. 386 WOBA against last season compared to the 280 on the 4-seamer. So I would say maybe drop the sinker usage and just use that 4-seam more if it does seem to be a good pitch for you. The curveball, change, and slider are all really good pitches. That's where he's going to get you out. Big innings from him last year. He doesn't walk a ton of guys. Doesn't really do anything else super above average. He does have a decent ground ball rate, but a solid guy that can go out there and give you innings at the least. Mitchell Parker, a really fun one for Washington. 2.4 wins above replacement per season since 22. 151 innings, 133 strikeouts. Not a great ERA, but the FIP likes him a bit more. Doesn't have great stuff, but he can locate his pitches really well. The Savant page doesn't love his stuff. The breaking run value is really solid, 89th percentile. The off-speed and fastball were in the bottom 10th percentile in the entire league. Last season was his rookie year, his first season in the majors for the Nationals, and there was a mixed bag of results. Really solid minor league numbers the entire time. Was never a huge prospect, but was a good pitcher down there. When Parker's good, he's really locating his pitches. He doesn't have the best stuff, so he's not going to get a ton of strikeouts. But at the bare minimum, a guy who's going to go out there and give you innings. More of a high floor than a high ceiling pitcher. If he can figure out that strikeout stuff, it's definitely a plus for him. If not, he'll be a good floor setter for this rotation. Also want to mention, grew a sick mustache after I made this presentation. Unfortunately, don't have the picture of it here. Trevor Williams, the first vet in this rotation, 32 years old. Only 66.2 innings last year, dealt with some injuries, doesn't have great stuff, but man, the numbers are solid for him last year. The biggest step forward for Williams, the fastball was incredible. You see the fastball run value there on the screen. The expected ERA number is really good alongside the expected batting average. He doesn't throw the fastball very hard, but it's a really good pitch for him. In 144.1 innings in 2023, a 5.55 ERA, the fastball run value in the 19th percentile in baseball. Last season, it generated a 14 run value in just those 66.2 innings. So a huge step forward in that rate for a 32-year-old pitcher. In 2023, the Savant page is really all blue. The expected ERA at 5.66, just a huge step forward from Trevor Williams in 2024. Hopefully he can continue that success into 2025, because if he does, this becomes a very valuable piece for this Nationals organization moving forward. So Michael Soroka here, currently listed as the 5 starter on Fangraphs. 19 starts last season, but 25 appearances, came out of the bullpen 6 times. The OPS stat against as a reliever, 594 compared to 856 against as a starter. He took a giant step forward in those smaller inning opportunities. The Nationals are a bit desperate for pitching depth at the moment, so I do understand why they want to throw him in as a starter and see if he can do it again. I think I have an option below this that I would currently have as the 5 starter and move Soroka to the bullpen, although I think Soroka can do it. He's shown he's been a good player before, a 2019 season that was incredible. Although that was 5 years ago, he has the same fastball velocity as that, and he has a couple good numbers here. He limits hard contact. He's starting to get more strikeouts. If he can cut that walk rate by a decent amount and kind of get back to a more controlled pitcher that he was in 2019, I think he can be a good starter. The breaking pitches were really good last year. The fastball wasn't as good. That is when Soroka is good, when he has his fastball going. He's here on a 1-year, $9 million deal, a free agent after the season. Might end up being a trade candidate, but might end up working his way into another contract with the Nationals as well. DJ Herz might be my favorite guy in this entire rotation, even over MacKenzie Gore. 3.71 FIP last year, about league average and stuff. He gets strikeouts, man. He's got some really, really good stuff. Had 19 starts with the Nats last season, 84th percentile run value on the fastball. The breaking pitch is about league average, off speed a bit below average, but really good with the expected stats, the expected ERA and expected batting average. Love him. The surface stats weren't great for him. The ERA needs to come down a bit, and I think it will given a bigger sample. The fastball, the changeup, and the slider, all with expected WOBAs under 300 last season, and both got hit a bit more. I think he takes a big step forward as a pitcher if he's given the opportunity this year. A left-handed young guy, still only 24 years old, was very valuable when he was up last season. Definitely a young starter to watch for the Nationals. Kyle Finnegan is going to slot in as the closer. Welcome back. Just signed a little bit ago for the Nationals. 33 years old. A 3.68 ERA for the Nats last season. 4.25 on the FIP, so a little bit of a regression is kind of expected there. Above average stuff. He is susceptible to the home run, 1.29 homers per 9. He's a 4-seam split guy for the majority of the time. Very hard thrower, 92nd percentile in fastball velo. The way to get him is hitting the ball hard. First percentile in average exit velocity, second in hard hit rate. That's where you can get Finnegan. Good off-speed pitches. The fastball and breaking are a bit below league average. Jorge Lopez is going to be a high leverage guy here for the Nats. A 2.89 ERA, mostly with the Cubs last season. 76th percentile expected batting average. The ground ball rate is very high in the 86th percentile. Good off-speed pitches, 4 run value on just those pitches. Everything else around league average for Jorge Lopez. A solid guy to have here and a nice vet in the back of the bullpen. Jose Ferrer is really my favorite pitcher, I think, on this entire team. The stuff is outrageous. You see the stuff plus there on the screen. ERA at 3.38 was great, but even then, the FIP was much better at 2.76. Doesn't get a ton of strikeouts, but really doesn't walk anybody. I think those strikeout numbers will go up. He just has the stuff to do it. Whole lot of red on the Savant page. Shout out to Playboy Cardi. The fastball velo, 97th percentile. Expected ERA was 2.7 last year. Walk rate was in the top 15th percentile. Barrel rate, literally the best in baseball. Didn't qualify for these stats as a reliever because of the innings, but still was very good. The ground ball rate is up there as well. Will give up some hard hits and doesn't strike out a ton of guys, but does have good stuff. I think we have a good season coming for Jose Ferrer. Getting into the rest of this bullpen, Derek Law had a great 2024. 90 innings pitched, a 2.60 ERA, 3.32 FIP. Good strikeout numbers, doesn't walk a ton of guys. He's a real 6-pitch pitcher out of the bullpen, which is definitely a plus. 96th percentile chase rate. He was 88th percentile on the breaking run value. Barrel rate in the top 5%. Does really everything well except for the K rate. Really a good pitcher to have, and maybe this bullpen's best guy on day one. Colin Poche here, the second guy. All he throws is a four-seam and a slider, doesn't throw very hard, but he gets pretty good numbers. The Savant page is a pretty big drop-off from 2023, so you might see a bit of a regression from him. He was great that year, though, a 2.23 ERA, a 3.86 last season. The expected numbers all took a big hit. Wasn't striking out as many guys last year and was giving up a lot of hard contact. Hopefully a bounce back for Poche in 2024. Lucas Sims, really new here to Washington, gets a decent amount of strikeouts, but will walk a lot of guys 14% of the time last year. Does not give up hard contact, 99th percentile in average exit velocity, 95th in hard hit rate. Worst at walking in all of baseball, first percentile, and gives up contact in the air as well, lowest ground ball rate in the entire league. Evan Reifer, one of the more interesting guys on a major league roster in the entire league. Double-A with Tampa Bay last year, 1.96 ERA, 2.34 FIP, struck out over 40% of batters, but again, has never pitched above Double-A before in his life. A Rule 5 pick, Washington will have to keep him up all year or return him to Tampa Bay. A really exciting young player, 40% strikeout rate, man. And then Shinosuke Ogasawara, left-handed pitcher brought over from Japan last season. The 2024 stats in Japan, 144.1 innings, 3.12 ERA, 3.45 FIP. Didn't really strike out anybody, but also didn't walk anybody. Gave up a lot of contact last season, but not seemingly hard contact. I don't have great numbers on Ogasawara, but a guy that the Nats believed in, and I think anytime you can bring somebody over from Japan with those type of stats, you get pretty ecstatic about it. An interesting bullpen here for the Nats in 2025. Going into the prospects, and a fun group here, two in the top 100. Travis Sykora is your number one prospect, 55 Baseball America grade. Never gotten above A, but really good stats last year. A 1.87 FIP, 2.33 ERA in 85 innings. A really good fastball, an above average slider, and changeup. Solid control, 20 years old for Sykora. The first overall pick of the third round in 2023 for Washington, a great year last year. 59th in the top 100, somebody you can definitely dream on. Sounds like he's dealing with a bit of an injury at the current moment, won't be pitching until May this year, but a high school pitcher drafted in the third round and a top 60 prospect as a pitcher for Washington. Jarlin Susana, I believe is how you say it. I apologize if that's wrong. 20 years old. 55 on the Baseball America grade, got up to high A last year. One of the biggest ERA FIP differences that I've seen. A great fastball, a great slider, and an above average changeup to go along with it. 103.2 innings last season. He was also part of the return for Juan Soto. So a package is just keep stacking. There's one more player I'll talk about in that trade. Touches 102 miles an hour on that fastball and has a very good slider to go along with it. If the changeup really develops into a plus third pitch, you could see a high-end starter here with how good the fastball and slider is. But if it doesn't, you could see a dominant closer in Susana. Number 67 in the top 100 and the number 2 prospect for Washington. Brady House is the number 3 prospect here, 21 years old, another 55 Baseball America grade. He was up in Triple-A last year. House was the number 11 pick in the 2021 draft. He has very good power, is a very good defender, but didn't really have great numbers in the minors last season, getting up to Triple-A. A bit below league average as a hitter, did have 19 home runs. I think a bit of that power and defense can kind of help to mask a bit of the hit tool deficiencies that he might have. House was formerly top 100, kind of dropped off of the list because of the struggles that he had last season. But he's somebody to watch moving forward, still only 21 years old. His career is nowhere close to over. I think he'll be up in the majors at some point this year, factoring into that third base competition. He is a good defender there, so he could bring value in that area if he even isn't a great hitter. But a guy with a high draft pedigree, has had some decent stats in the minors, but struggled a bit last season. Let's see what we get from Brady House going forward. A fun group of infield prospects here for the Nats, and you gotta start with Seaver King. S-tier name, by the way. Run tool at 70, 55 power, and everything else is average to above average. 21 years old, got up to A-ball last year. He was the number 5 prospect for the Nats. The Nats' top pick from the draft last season out of Wake Forest was really good. 122 weighted runs created plus in his little stint, 20 games, 90 plate appearances in A-ball. Walked 10% of the time, doesn't strike out very often. Definitely a huge prospect for the Nats and one to watch going forward. Yohandy Morales is the second prospect that I have here. Shout out to Miami, great college player. 129 in weighted runs created plus last season in the minors between A and Double-A. 239 in his 6 games at A and then got up to Double-A, 119 there. Walks over 10% of the time. He had 7 homers in 75 games last season. a plus bat and a good arm at third base. I think he might end up moving to first base because of some of the fielding issues, but a great hitter in Yohandy Morales. Kevin Basil, a catcher, 21 years old, got up to A last year, 14th prospect for the Nats. 4th round pick last season, crushed it in a small sample in A-ball, 148 weighted runs created plus in 14 games there. Walked 18% of the time, 402 WOBA. Good arm behind the plate, a good hit tool. One thing you really like with a lot of these prospects is they put up very good numbers. Caden Wallace here, a third base prospect, came over from Kansas City at the deadline last year for Hunter Harvey. 45 plate appearances with Washington in Double-A, a 25 weighted runs created plus. Really struggled after he came over, but was putting up good numbers before. Ended the season with a 96 weighted runs created plus. Doesn't walk very often, doesn't strike out very often either. More of a bat-to-ball guy than anything, but he has had good stats throughout the minors. Should be a fun player to watch. And then finally, Angel Feliz, an amateur free agent from the Dominican this past offseason. 49 games in the DSL, 27% better than league average. Some pretty good grades for him. I would expect him to move up the ranks pretty quickly. A really good group of performing infield prospects for the Nationals. So Robert Hassel III is your first outfield prospect here. The final piece of that Juan Soto trade that just keeps on giving. He really took a step back last year, and his performance has kind of gone in the drain since he got traded to Washington. 87 weighted runs created plus in 85 games with Washington last season. Really a bounce back prospect more than anything, but a guy who was the 8th overall pick in the draft, a highly touted guy for a while in San Diego's system. Has some good tools. Hopefully he can bounce back and perform this season. Got up to AAA last year. Dalen Lyle, another outfielder. 2nd round pick in 2021. Good stats last year for the Nats minor league teams. 113 weighted runs created plus. 6 homers and 25 steals in 130 games. Walks around 10% of the time. Doesn't strike out very often. You have to mention Elijah Green when you talk about Nationals outfield prospects, even though it hasn't been great for him. 5th overall pick in 2022. The strikeouts have been just unbearable for him in the minors. K rates of 40% almost every single year. Last season, 44% K rate. Still was about league average, 94 on the weighted runs created plus. He has some pop to his game, but man, he's really got to cut the strikeouts. Otherwise, he's not really going anywhere. A dude with high prospect pedigree that just really has stalled in the minors. And then Daishil Tejada, kind of one to be watching going forward. A 432 on base, 44% better than league average as a hitter last season. Still very young in the DSL. He was an amateur free agent in 2023. And then getting into kind of a light group of pitching prospects, 26th ranked in my system rankings. Cade Cavalli, former top prospect. He's been up to the majors but got injured, didn't have much of a sample there. Still the number 7 prospect. A really good fastball, a really good curveball, 2 kind of middling pitches in the slider and the change. 26 years old for Cavalli. Got back to the minors in very limited fashion last season, 8.1 innings, but a 2.16 ERA. It looks like he does have his stuff back. Hopefully he can bounce back and end up going somewhere close to where his prospect pedigree used to have him as. Alex Clemmy, a fun lefty here, acquired from the Guardians at the deadline last season. A 3.56 FIP in the minors, 11.99 Ks per 9. Does walk a decent amount of guys, though, to go along with that. 92.1 innings last season. Still just 19 years old. A really good fastball and a really good curveball. The control and changeup both need some work. Could end up being a long-term relief guy because the fastball and curveball are so good, but is starting right now. Andre Lara for Washington here, 134.2 innings for the system last year, a 3.34 ERA, a 4.03 FIP to go along with that. Struck out 24% of the batters he faced, 8.1% on the walk rate. Really solid stats for him last year. A really cool one here, Marquise Grissom Jr. I'm not just putting this on here because of the name. He was really solid last year. 2.21 ERA, a 3.22 FIP in 53 innings. He's a complete relief prospect, but still really good numbers. Struck out about 26% of batters he faced last year and walked 6%. Not much prospect data on him, but he was very good. A 13th round pick in 2022 out of Georgia Tech. And then Tyler Stewart, acquired as part of the Jesse Winker trade last year from the Mets. Pretty solid slider and pretty decent command. The fastball wasn't very good last year. Decent numbers last year in the minors, though. 3.34 FIP. Struck out 9.93 per 9. The walks per 9 very low at 2.7. A decent pitcher, the number 25 prospect in this national system. This projected 2028 lineup by Baseball America is just the stuff that you absolutely dream on when you start a rebuild. Ruiz at catcher is a bit of a question mark. We went over it in his breakdown. If he can take a step forward offensively, maybe develop a bit of a different profile, he can be good, but not a good defensive catcher. Interesting there long term. Brady House, again, needs to kind of take a step forward in the minors, but having him at first base, and there are some other options, as I mentioned, in Morales and Nathaniel Lowe still being on this roster. Luis Garcia at second base, really solid player. Seaver King, they have at third base. Personally, I go Seaver King at shortstop and Abrams at third base. Abrams right now is just too much of a question mark defensively. If he can figure that out, he's a great shortstop. He brings a lot of value. But right now, the defense just isn't there for Abrams. I do expect both of these guys to be in the lineup, though. And then that great young outfield in Wood, Young, and Cruz. Two really, really good defenders, two really good runners. Wood is a really good runner and a great hitter, not as much on the defensive side, but he can develop a bit there still. And then Nathaniel Lowe they have as a designated hitter. The only guy projected to be above 30 years old here, Ruiz, the next youngest at 29. I mean, this is just such a fun group. I would be really excited for this Nationals lineup if I was watching this, and this is what a good rebuild looks like. Not to mention the number one pick could be in this lineup as well. Should be a really fun 2028 season for the Nats. And then getting into this rotation and closer, finally, MacKenzie Gore still as the one starter. Travis Sykora and Susana both as starters here. I do really like that. I think Sykora is really going to make his way through this system quickly. A really good pitcher with really good stats. Susana could potentially be the closer, but they have Cade Cavalli there as the closer right now, which I do really like. Cavalli has a couple really solid pitches and is somebody that I could see developing into a really good reliever. Josiah Gray they have coming back from injury and reclaiming his spot in this rotation. And then Mitchell Parker as the number 5 guy. I think this is a pretty good list. I would expect the Nats to add to this group in free agency, if anything. This projected lineup doesn't really take into account any potential free agent acquisitions. And this group here with the rotation, closer, and the lineup would be very low in capital, so they can go out and spend some money on good pitchers, maybe somebody to bring up at catcher or a first baseman. A really solid group and a really, really fun group to look forward to for the Washington Nationals. A couple final thoughts on this group, wrapping it up. I think a really fun young lineup, a really good future to look forward to. You're really starting to see the fruits of this rebuild kind of pay into the major league roster. That number one pick, you got to be so excited about. That could be Ethan Holiday. That could be a lot of other players. A really fun draft group this year, so that'll be fun for Nats fans. An interesting pitching group. The rotation not as good. The bullpen has some question marks, but I think a developmental group and one that could be solid. More high floor than high ceiling, I think, but guys like DJ Herz and MacKenzie Gore could be long-term options. This team plays in a tough division. I don't know if they'll be competing this year, but I think this is really the year they take that step up, maybe win 77, 78 games, and then next season is the season they go out and they get somebody in free agency, really put some money into this team, and they go after the second stages of this rebuild. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. It takes a long time to make these videos, so anything is appreciated. Like, comment, subscribe if you guys liked it. The 24th ranked Washington Nationals.